Like a silhouette, he moved through German history. Like hardly any other historical figure, he challenges us to take a stance with his thoughts and actions even today. He is not allowed to rest, and he gives no peace. Long dead, yet evidently not at all gone. He fascinates, provokes, attracts, and repels. Frederick of Prussia, Frederick II, celebrated as Frederick the Great, idealized as the good old Fritz, revered as a jovial father of the land, a brilliant military leader of his time, but also condemned as a ruthless oppressor. By the way, he calls himself Frederick, is a great German ruler, and speaks his German only in the native Berlin dialect. He much prefers to read, write, and converse in the finest French. He lives as a king and artist, warrior and philosopher, reformer, builder, destroyer. Much applies to him, yet with him the exact opposite is always true as well. Such a figure is perfect for legends, stimulates imagination and curiosity. A biography that repeatedly invites new engagement. A subject tailor-made for grand staging. A figure perfectly suited for skillful instrumentalization. No wonder then that countless anecdotes surround such a person. It's only logical that illustrators and painters, writers and historians, publishers and film producers repeatedly take him on. And yet, astonishing how quickly and thoroughly the legends develop their own life and the fictions almost completely overgrow the facts. Frederick becomes a favorite subject for magnificent historical paintings, which one is all too willing to believe must have looked exactly like that. The old Fritz becomes a heroic figure like out of a picture book, from which one gains the impression that it must have happened just like that.
Blockade! Attack!
Fredericus becomes a celebrated film star who repeatedly makes box offices ring and shows how it must have been back then.
We must defeat the enemy, or let ourselves all be buried by his batteries. That's how I think, and that's how I will act.
In the end, Frederick the Great is supposed to sell the megalomania of the Third Reich, in which Hitler leads Germany into the abyss. Of course, Frederick can't be blamed for that. After that, his reputation is thoroughly damaged with German thoroughness, his history overshadowed by a bad end, and Frederick is finally taken off his pedestal, set aside, and disposed of. Done away with. Done? Not with this defiant one. Even the GDR seems to need him in the end and reactivates the old reservist. In reunified Germany, then a state funeral of the first class, celebrated with all the pomp exactly as he did not want to have it. Everyone who repeatedly tells his story inevitably tells a lot about themselves, and everyone who portrays him paints his picture in the tinted colors of their own time.
You cursed rascals! Do you want to live forever?
Where is the reality hidden behind the legends? What should one perhaps really know about him? Who is this Frederick? If you want to understand what this Frederick is all about, you have to take a brief look at the late 17th century and the familial and political environment into which he was born. The Brandenburg residence Berlin has meanwhile recovered from the 30 Years' War and is now once again a flourishing small town with little more than 20,000 inhabitants. Almost a third of them are Huguenots, primarily craftsmen and traders, scientists, artists, whom the great elector Frederick William brought into the country. The center is formed by the Renaissance castle built in the 15th century on the Museum Island. And now his son, Frederick III, Elector of Brandenburg, resides there. He is an ambitious man, driven above all by one desire. He doesn't just want to remain Count of Brandenburg and Duke in Prussia, but to become a king. But only the emperor can grant royal dignity. So Frederick pays a high price, 2 million ducats to the Habsburg Emperor Leopold I. To document his sovereignty to the world, Frederick places the crown on his own head in the castle church there. Now, mind you, he is king in Prussia, but not of Prussia. Frederick likes to live large. The banquet in Königsberg is as elaborate as the lavish parties you like to throw otherwise. The newly crowned monarch now finds the old Renaissance castle outdated. He promptly commissions the sculptor Andreas Schlüter to build a new Baroque palace. Due to his constant financial demands, first for the coronation, then for the palace constructions in Berlin, Potsdam, and elsewhere, the growing court, jewelry purchases, and princely gifts, the court's budget is constantly exceeded. The policy of the quite art-loving Frederick relies on a strong army and a splendid court, which, as he would like, should compete with the richest countries in Europe. Since he is keen on preserving the dynasty, his only son, Frederick William, must marry a suitable princess at the age of 18. The choice falls on a cousin, the 20-year-old Hanoverian princess Sophie Dorothea, whom he marries in 1706 with great public interest. The Crown Prince Frederick William, who will soon become the father of our Frederick, absolutely detests the extravagance.
His Royal Majesty has awakened.
In these early years, the Berliners know little about him, only that he is said to be somewhat peculiar, also very headstrong, definitely quite different from his ostentatious father.
May I, Your Majesty, inquire about your well-being?
Thank you, Count. I feel refreshed.
Frederick William, the future soldier king, makes no secret of his firm rejection of his father's extravagant court and gives a preview of what lies ahead for the Prussian state. First of all, 7 lean years.
On January 24th, 1712, Crown Princess Sophie Dorothea gives birth to a son, who is named Frederick after his grandfather. And here begins the actual story of our protagonist. After the early death of the first 2 sons and the birth of his 2-year older sister, Wilhelmine, Frederick is now the eldest surviving son and the future heir and crown prince. The event is recorded on a commemorative coin. Not a stork, but the Brandenburg eagle with the future king's crown in its claws now brings the crown prince. A week later, Frederick's baptism takes place. All the bells of Berlin ring and all the city's cannons fire salutes over the rooftops. A few weeks after his birth, the long ailing king dies. The family kneels in prayer at his deathbed. Frederick leaves his son a huge mountain of debt. He declares that the new virtues from now on are duty, work, and strictest frugality.
In Prussia, everything changes overnight. This painting, showing the new ruler with a crown, is a product of the painter's imagination. Throughout his entire life, Friedrich Wilhelm, like his son later on, will never wear a crown. He sells the coronation mantle at the first opportunity to the highest bidder. The silverware is melted down. His very first goal, to make the state debt-free again. The paper with diagonal lines on Adolf Menzel's drawing means the new king sends all the court sycophants, who only cost money and do nothing useful, home. A page from the rank regulation of 1713, which is located in the secret Prussian State Archive in Berlin. Here alone, positions are eliminated without replacement. The castle captain, the herald master, the court marshal, the chief ceremony master, and many others. In their place, major generals now advance, who are to perform their duties, namely to raise a formidable army for the king.
The Berlin trade lived off the court, Your Majesty. But since there is no more royal court, not safe from the recruiters anymore. On the contrary, Your Majesty, my recruiters are no longer safe. Armed to the teeth, high school students attacked them. Your recruiters were armed to the teeth, and they drove a high school student to his death from the roof.
How do you know that, Grundling?
I was a witness.
Pebusch! You have a beautiful chapel there. But too big and too expensive. We'll be cut. Everyone can leave. Only you stay, Pebusch. Get the trumpeters and oboists from the big grenadiers. They can do it just as well and don't cost extra. Grundling. Good, Peposh. Keep it up. Practice, practice, and practice again with the guys. Don't sit in the village tavern so much. And Handel's music is also very good. I will pay for the sheet music from London. He can bring the bill, Peposh.
In the first 4 years, little Fritz grows up in the rather French-influenced court city of his Welf mother, Sophie Dorothea. He and his sister Wilhelmine, 2 years older, are entrusted to a Huguenot who had already cared for his father, Madame de Roncoul. However, she fundamentally only speaks French and, even after 40 years in Berlin, cannot speak a single word of the local language. And so Fritz learns the clumsy German that he will retain for his entire life from the domestics, the servants, stable boys and coachmen. With miniature cannons, tin soldiers and a drum, he is seen in the first painting with his sister. The marriage of the ambitious mother with the increasingly stubborn and choleric Friedrich Wilhelm is anything but happy.
Thankfully, he is often absent from Berlin for entire months. This king is constantly on the move in his far-flung possessions and takes care of everything. He dictated to his ministers an extensive general instruction with 35 chapters and 297 paragraphs, which is to apply from Cleve in the Rhineland to East Prussia in the future. Specifically, this remote province, which always takes several days to reach, is his greatest concern. The land remains barren and depopulated due to the 30 Years' War and plague epidemics. Now he appears in Königsberg at regular intervals and keeps a close watch on the Junkers. In the first 10 years of his reign, he founded 24 towns in Prussian Lithuania and brought 20,000 settlers into the country. Not Huguenots like the Great Elector, because they would hardly come to the remote East Prussia. They are actually Protestants from Salzburg who are persecuted in Austria because of their faith. When he's back in Berlin, he takes Fritz aside for a talk, because he's starting to develop his own thoughts.
But when you grow up, my little one, a real man, will you do it like the others? Eat, drink, curse, scold, whore? Pardon, Mrs. von Ruckul, but he'll have to learn about it someday. Well, my little one?
No.
Did he say no?
I won't do it like the others.
You will be a man of rank, a crown prince.
At 8 years old, Friedrich already has to follow his meticulously planned schedule. The subjects desired by his father, mainly religion, mathematics, history, economics, and military studies. The father's regulations state he should get up at 7 in the morning, fall to his knees before the bed, pray briefly to God and loudly. Then he should get dressed quickly and wash himself properly, comb and powder himself, and he must be completely ready, including getting dressed and breakfast, in 15 minutes. At 14, Friedrich, at least in this depiction, does not appear as a cheerful, carefree boy, but already strangely dignified. Children of the nobility were considered little adults back then, who had to behave accordingly. This is particularly evident in the contemporary depiction showing the father's tobacco collegium. Friedrich sits at the front of the table with his 2 younger brothers on the left, who are already wearing uniforms. This tobacco collegium is a peculiar institution of the father, where all present at the table can, indeed should, openly express their opinions. The choleric king, who otherwise tolerates no contradiction, hopes that here, in a not entirely sober state, the truth will be spoken and things will be openly discussed. Friedrich deeply hates the gatherings where he is also supposed to drink beer.
As often as he can, he escapes into the world of his mother, who has created a small countercourt in her little palace, Montbijou. She approves of Friedrich using the father's frequent absences to secretly take flute lessons and hold musical soirees with his sister without his father's knowledge. Throughout his youth, Friedrich is torn between the cultured ambiance of his mother, who places great value on worldly manners, and the completely contrasting world of his often rough, gruff father. He appreciates hunts, male company, and simple straightforwardness. And above all those virtues he declares Prussian: thriftiness, honesty, cleanliness, and reliability. When Friedrich enters puberty at 15, he begins to rebel more and more against the unloved father, who seems ridiculous with his fixation on the military. What the father does not suspect, the Crown Prince also seeks refuge in a small attic room where he continues secret hours with his flute teacher, Joachim Quantz.
Forgive me, Quantz. I'm not focused today.
This other world, so foreign to the father, seems to him the only one worth striving for. His tutor, Leonhard, also a Huguenot refugee, teaches Friedrich until he falls out of royal favour in 1727. He teaches him literature and Latin and provides him with books that the father must not know about. Among them, The Prince, by the Italian Renaissance author Machiavelli.
I can't get our reading from yesterday out of my head.
Machiavelli's work about the prince? Royal Highness had little liking for it. They found the thoughts of this Italian to be degrading.
Whether I like them or not, it's the contradiction that intrigues me. This Machiavelli is a mere cynic. He fails to recognize that no feeling is as inseparable from our being as that of freedom.
May I assume that your own experiences are with the royal father?
Whether high or low, we are all born without chains. Every person wants to exist without coercion. We want to stand on our own and not submit to the whims of others. I would like to know what Voltaire thinks about Machiavelli.
Hardly different from Royal Highness. You had intended to write to him.
Who am I to address one of the greatest minds of our time? A small, despised prince.
You will be king.
Yes. Then my first act will be to bring Voltaire to Berlin.
Shortly after Frederick is just 16, the father decides to accept an invitation from Augustus the Strong to Dresden. And since he no longer trusts the rebellious Fritz, who has developed such different ideas from his own, he decides to take him along. Not a very good idea. Frederick is suddenly confronted with a completely new, splendid world he had no idea about before. In Dresden, they are celebrating Carnival. With all the galleries, pipes, violins and drums, tireless musicians, thousands of candles illuminate the cheerful and exuberant hustle and bustle. When Augustus throws parties, champagne flows in rivers. He himself is considered a legend. Allegedly, he fathered dozens of children. Even the father, who has been put in a carnival costume, suddenly appears more relaxed here, and Frederick is amazed. Moreover, there are women everywhere. Beautiful, seductive, accessible. Legends about the young crown prince's experiences at the Dresden court later fill books. Fritz allegedly falls in love with a beauty named Formera. Additionally, he is introduced to Countess Orzelska, who is said to be both the daughter and the mistress of the host. The claim that Frederick contracted a venereal disease at the Dresden court, which later led to his inability to father children, comes from a questionable source, the not always very credible memoirs of his sister Wilhelmine.
The return visit by Augustus shortly thereafter is somewhat more formal. The two sovereigns make deals, for example, antiques for particularly tall dragoons. Meanwhile, Frederick's mother, the ambitious Wolff Sophie Dorothea, is spinning marriage plans for her eldest daughter and the crown prince. However, she initially reveals nothing of this to her husband. To him, the 16-year-old Frederick still seems far too immature for marriage.
Be honest, you have debts. How much?
I would have to add it up first.
Tell me the sum, Fritz. I will gladly pay it. If you only change your conduct and become a proper man.
I will try as best as I can.
Why do you make a grimace?
Grimace? Me?
You're making fun of me.
I am deadly serious.
You grumble about your father. Inwardly you grumble.
I have never grumbled. I try to look serious, otherwise you might think I don't care about your accusations.
His stubborn, wicked head. Who does not love his father?
But I do love him.
He knows I can't stand an effeminate guy who has no masculine inclinations. Why isn't he at least ashamed that he can't ride or shoot?
I can ride and I can also shoot.
Yes, but all only with reluctance and resistance. Why is he such a poor hunter?
I'm bored by chasing after innocent hares and other creatures.
Tomorrow is Hubertus Day. Maybe he'll at least do his father the favor of showing up on time for the hunt.
Yes, Father, as the Lord commands.
I know what you're doing, trying to escape my disciplinary route. But don't think it'll work. I'll keep you on a leash for a while longer.
The relationship between the Crown Prince and his dominant father, who demands complete conformity to his values, is leading to increasing alienation. In his view, Friedrich lacks true love for the soldier's profession. But poor Prussia, surrounded by potential enemies, must, in his opinion, inevitably increase the efficiency of firearms to withstand opponents and therefore possess a capable army. Here we see the father engaged in one of his favorite activities. Often plagued by gout, he paints one of his long soldiers. Since his youth, the king has paid special attention to recruiting tall young men for his king's regiment in Potsdam, a preference that becomes his great passion and develops into a veritable trademark, especially in his later years. Already as Crown Prince, he began the hunt for young men over 1.88 meters tall. For this, he sends recruiters to Hungary, Croatia, Courland, and Ukraine. Otherwise frugal in all areas, Friedrich Wilhelm is here, willing to pay large sums of money without hesitation. A so-called domestic 6-footer costs him 600 thalers. For men 1.92 meters tall from abroad, he pays 3,000 thalers. Between 1,713 and 1,735, a total of 12 million thalers in recruitment funds went abroad in this way. This peculiar collecting passion of the king soon became known throughout Europe. Foreign diplomats bring the king tall fellows as gifts to gain his favor.
Good. Beautiful. People look proper. Wonderful.
I report obediently to my post, Your Majesty.
Lieutenant von Katte.
Your Majesty.
Tell the friend, the Crown Prince of Prussia, that a colonel of my regiment must not appear for duty like a son of a whore. If the youngest recruit of the Prussian army dared to appear before me in such a swinish, disgusting manner, I would beat him out of the Prussian army.
Public humiliations are the order of the day in the royal family at this time.
I would consider it a flute, Majesty.
Flute? What is a flute supposed to be doing here and now?
At night, the king returns earlier than usual from the tobacco college and surprises the crown prince together with his sister playing the flute. The friend Katte, who is also present, can just barely hide in time. Subsequently, the father escalates our conflict. Frederick Wilhelm, here embodied by Emil Jannings, articulates his pent-up anger against the wayward son with loud raging and shouting, as perhaps only conceivable in the melodramatic films of the early 30s.
Climbing out of the window like a stable boy heading to a cattle market.
Why does he lock me up?
How does he speak to his king, scoundrel? Has my leniency made him bold? Does he take my fatherly indulgence for weakness?
Fatherly indulgence? Mercy, that he takes everything from me that my heart clings to? He calls that mercy?
What does his heart cling to, then? On the junk?
On the God-forsaken? Has he worked as I commanded? No. But notes?
He has written notes.
What about the notes? Gone. Gone from here. What did the Crown Prince of Prussia study?
These are my poems, Father.
What did he study? Did he study tariffs, taxes, political science, filthy literature, obscenities? Into the fire with it!
The screenplay of the 1935 film The Old and the Young King was created a year after the public book burnings initiated by the Nazis in several German university cities. One of the numerous scenes in the Frederick's films of the Nazi era where the ideology of the Third Reich is clearly reflected.
I can't listen to that anymore.
So, you don't care about that, do you?
You don't give a damn.
Whether the choleric outburst, the events at the time between father and son, portrayed by Werner Hinz, even remotely reflects reality, must remain unresolved. The authentic letters of Friedrich Wilhelm testify in any case to a rawness and brutality that today seems hardly imaginable.
Katte, I can't take it anymore. I need to talk to you. Come to me this evening. The king is in the tobacco. We are undisturbed. I need to talk to you.
About what?
I want to leave. Have you gone mad? I can't stay here any longer, Katte. I'm suffocating. I'm perishing.
That means you want to flee. And you expect me, the soldier Katte, to help the Crown Prince of Prussia desert?
Be quiet.
The Royal Highness will be late for the audience.
Well, hand it over. This cursed uniform will one day be my death shroud.
Friedrich admires the worldly sophistication of the 8-year-old Lieutenant Hans Hermann von Katte, who is one of his few close confidants. Both are interested in flute playing and poetry. Katte tries to dissuade him from his escape plan, but eventually supports him. Although it would actually be his duty, he says nothing about it to others. Countless legends now circulate about Friedrich's escape plan and its seriousness. The fact is, his father hardly takes his eyes off him anymore and takes him along on a trip to southern Germany that has been planned for some time.
Specialist in Friedrich's military actions is Professor Jürgen Klosterheiss, director of the secret Prussian state archives in Berlin.
I believe that all indications suggest that the young Friedrich truly meant this escape attempt seriously and also prepared for it in the long term. There are corresponding approaches already at the end of 1729, already in May 1730. This trip, which he was then allowed to undertake with his father to southern and western Germany, was once again a very good opportunity for him to get close to his initially targeted escape destination. That was Alsace, and this trip was just right for that.
We will arrive in Mannheim in time.
Scene of the event. A barn in the town of Steinfurt near Mannheim, where the travel party sets up their night quarters in the hay. After everyone has gone to bed, the Crown Prince spends a restless night, having instructed a page to procure 2 suitable horses with which they can escape in the darkness.
A message of utmost importance, Majesty.
Let him in.
But the page does not appear, instead someone entirely different. A messenger suddenly appears, at least in the film, and delivers to the sleep-dazed king an allegedly compromising letter, which was mistakenly addressed to a cousin of Katte's and supposedly exposes him as an accomplice in the escape. However the events may have played out in detail, Friedrich Wilhelm is indeed deeply affected by the news. A deserting crown prince that had never happened before and would disgrace him before the whole world.
I think that the significance of the escape episode in the king's life correlates with the various rumors, legends, and myths that have now portrayed the story in a completely false way for various motives. One can say that neither coincidences, nor the malice of objects, nor any other factors contributed to the failure, but rather the way Frederick planned his escape attempt, how he tried to find new accomplices after the old ones were no longer available. In this manner, failure was inevitable, and that's why his endeavor ultimately came to nothing.
May I ask what your Royal Highness is doing here?
I want to go for a little morning ride, my dear Mr. von Rothkow.
In this attire?
Let me go, Rocho.
Must I cut off your hand, Royal Highness? I swear it. Turn back. My word of honor that the king will learn nothing from me.
Yes, gentlemen. My eldest son wants to leave me. The Crown Prince of Prussia wants to desert. Express courier to Berlin. Lieutenant von Katte is to be arrested for high treason. Otherwise, wait until we are on Prussian soil.
Why did your Royal Highness want to desert?
Because the king treats me not like his son, but like a slave.
Shortly thereafter, now back on Prussian soil, the first interrogation in Wesel by the city commander von der Mosel.
He does not know me. He cannot possibly know me from his world.
So, he doesn't know you? Because I don't like his music books and his flute playing. And my world is Prussia, not France and not Rome. The Herodotus and Tacitus and Livy, they cannot help us. What do they know about East Prussia and Pomerania? The refined language? Can I use them in the army? Or in agriculture? For you perfumed monkey, my grenadiers are scoundrels, I know that. But a little Frenchman, a little comedian, those are his idols. But I tell them, whoever wants to rule in this country one day, he has to work and save and not squander. The grenadiers are important, not the dance masters. Continue with the interrogation.
Did your Royal Highness not consider what this disastrous step could have brought a severe misfortune over the whole country? Political entanglements, perhaps war.
I have considered nothing, except that I...
Here again, one can hear some undertones that probably belong more to the diction of the Nazi era than to the 18th century. A rebellious crown prince Friedrich may have been, but to shout at his own father, who was still the sovereign of the country, this a son in that time would never have dared.
I give you to the executioner. I take from you throne and electorate.
You cannot do that. You overstep, father.
You want to tell me what I can do, scoundrel?
Kill me, Majesty, but spare your son.
Put him before a court-martial, in chains.
To Küstrin.
The scene depicted multiple times also belongs to the numerous legends. Despite all the wrath, Friedrich Wilhelm would never have gone so far as to stab his own successor with a sword. It is only certain that Friedrich was left in the dark about his further fate for long weeks, because only in October, 3 months after the escape, does the court-martial convene. At Katte, the judges agree on lifelong fortress imprisonment for desertion. But the king wants to set an example and informs the court to reconvene and issue a new verdict. He unmistakably urges the judges to impose a death sentence on Katte. When they refuse, Friedrich Wilhelm himself, on November 1st, 1730, changes the still lifelong fortress imprisonment verdict to a death sentence against Katte by his own highest cabinet order, which is to be executed on November 6th before Friedrich's eyes in Küstrin.
Indeed, the dramatic outcome has always occupied minds. The father's unyielding harshness, who wants to break the son's will in this way, the self-sacrificing devotion of the friend, the stuff from which legends are woven. At the capture of the Crown Prince and the dramatic execution of his innocent friend Katte by the sword, the still young cinema of the early 20th century naturally does not pass by. The first depiction appeared on the then still silent screens shortly after the First World War in 1920 under the title Storm and Stress. Already back then with Otto Gebühr as the main actor. At that time, when he portrayed the 18-year-old Friedrich, he was already 43 years old. This depicts the escape of the Crown Prince along with the subsequent execution of Katte. The unmistakable resemblance of Otto Gebühr to Friedrich in Adolf von Menzel's painting Flute Concert in Sanssouci seems to almost predestine him for the role. It wasn't until 1936 that the archival sources about the Katte interrogation protocols and the sessions of the Chamber Court became known. The director of the silent film at that time, Arsène von Cherepi, therefore relies on pure legends. In this case, he is inspired by a 1918 bestseller by the German nationalist writer Walter van Molo titled Fredericus. After the king heard the court's verdict, he was not willing to accept its internal logic. The judges argued that one couldn't sentence the alleged helper to death if the instigator and main perpetrator went free. A life sentence is punishment enough. But Friedrich Wilhelm is not convinced and tears up the verdict. The judges leave the room in the film, leaving the king alone. In the early Weimar Republic, a reaction that seemed appropriate. After all, shortly after the emperor's abdication, one no longer took orders from a monarch. His obstinacy is also emphasized again. Even Katte's grandfather, the esteemed Field Marshal von Wartensleben, is unable to achieve anything with his written plea for clemency. The king responds to Katte's parents unmoved. "Your son would indeed deserve to be tortured with glowing tongs." But he has mitigated the punishment so far that he will only have his head cut off as an example and warning to all. Katte himself hears the verdict, surprisingly composed. "I am completely resigned to Providence and the will of the king. I have committed no bad deed, and if I die, it is for a good cause." Few situations from Frederick II's life have been depicted as often as the Katte complex. Therefore, this section clearly shows how much the depictions are owed to the taste of the times, and how little they have to do with the historical figure itself. A filmed execution site may appear just as threatening to the audience from above, but silent drums can hardly be replaced by an accompanying piano to convey the drama. The early Frederikus films may seem unintentionally pathetic and comical to us today. In 1920-21, they were the biggest box office success of the season. The supposed depiction of events, whether by a painter or a camera, can only create associations in the viewer's mind. A crown prince struck dumb with horror can only express this in silent film times with very drastic means. Being forced to watch something you absolutely don't want to see, something unbearable to look at, everyone understands that. These and later images in which Otto Gebühr portrays Friedrich imprint themselves on an entire generation of Germans, yet they merely spring from the imagination of directors, are staged, and remain fiction.
The question of whether the Crown Prince had to witness the execution of Lieutenant von Katte or not was already a matter of concern in the 19th century. No less a figure than Theodor Fontane conducted studies in Küstrin. Another local historian wrote small works on the subject, and they always concluded that the Crown Prince could not watch. This version is now supported by our records in such a way that one can assume the king wanted his Crown Prince, his son, to witness Katte's execution, but the local authorities managed to arrange it so that he could not watch.
Throughout his entire time in the fortress, Friedrich is stripped of his princely status. To get out of arrest after a few weeks of fortress imprisonment, he must, even if only seemingly, submit to his father's will. Here again, the same scene, filmed 15 years later. The National Socialists recognized the propaganda potential very well.
Colonel Fritz?
So what's going on? What do you want so early?
Lawbreakers cannot expect leniency. This time, the plot now aims to break Frederick's will. Through such a character test, the Crown Prince is supposed to be rid of his whims. First bewilderment, then horror. Finally, a test of conscience and insight into the necessity of obedience. Young men, hard as Krupp steel, the Führer wanted to create at the Nuremberg party rally in the same year.
What are you doing? You don't want to kill him, do you? Say that it's not true. Say that it's just a comedy, a dreadful comedy, to force me into submission. I submit, do you hear? I want to obey her, but say that it isn't true.
Lieutenant Hans Hermann von Katte is sentenced to death.
But Katte is innocent. You're murdering an innocent man. Commander, I beg you, I implore you, postpone the execution. I want to go to the king. Let me through.
What happens, happens by the king's command.
I am guilty, I alone. I will do anything that is asked of me. I will give up the crown, give up my own life. But mercy for Katte.
Too late.
Katte! 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 I am to blame for your death. I am your murderer. Forgive me. Forgive me.
I have nothing to forgive you for, my prince. If I had 1,000 lives, I would gladly sacrifice them for you.
Katte! Katte!
Lord Jesus. Into your hands I commend my spirit. Majesty, the death sentence on Lieutenant Hans Hermann von Katte has been carried out.
Did he remain steadfast?
Until the last moment.
Did he let himself be bound?
No, Majesty.
He should be given a salute of honor over his grave.
Guard! 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 What is shooting outside my window? Who did you murder today? Speak then.
No one was shot, Colonel.
An honor salute for Lieutenant von Katte.
An honor salute?
By order of the king.
Honor salute? First murder and then...
The king does not murder. His will is law. And what does not bow to him, he must destroy.
The land falls apart that does not have a single will.
You too will one day be the king, and will have to demand obedience.
Do you know how hard you are, Commander?
Hard. Like the duty you are meant to embody one day, Royal Highness.
With all films made after 1933 about historical subjects, especially these Prussian films, utmost caution is always advised. Especially in The Old and Young King, one can precisely determine in a crucial scene a dialogue between the commander of Küstrin Reichmann and the Crown Prince, that it was not in the script as it was shown in the film, but rather that a perspective was presented to the audience that was intended to legitimize the murders carried out on Hitler's orders on those involved in the so-called Röhm Putsch.
As punishment, Friedrich must now learn about military affairs in the army administration in Neuruppin for 2 years and command a garrison. Only then will he be readmitted into the army.
From my perspective, Friedrich was already a politically mature, internally stable character at the age of 18 in 1730, who wanted to enforce a certain concept and failed. At the moment he recognizes his failure, he also wisely retreats, although his retreat likely cost his co-conspirator Katte his head. So I don't believe that his character was broken or had to be broken by this event, but rather that he acted politically. That, of course, the whole thing did not leave him untouched, that he was also shaken by the way his father consistently brought the case to an end, is undisputed, but not for a lifetime.
The plan, already mentioned by Friedrich's mother, Sophie Dorothea, pursued for years to connect her 2 eldest children with the English court through a double marriage, seems to be put on hold after the annoying escape affair. But she does not give up. Friedrich has been of age for over a year now. Currently, he must fulfill his garrison duty, but according to his mother's will, he should marry as soon as possible. Sophie Dorothea is, as we recall, the daughter of the Elector of Hanover, who in 1714 ascended the British throne due to the lack of male heirs. She is now trying everything to assert Prussian interests at the English court by seeking a dynastic connection between the 2 houses. After the death of her father, her brother has now been King of England as George II for 3 years. One more reason to revive the plan. His sister Wilhelmine would be married to his son Frederick Louis, the Prince of Wales, who grew up in Hanover. And she is quite agreeable, as this opens up the prospect of becoming Queen of England one day. Whether Friedrich liked the English match, as she planned or not, he wasn't asked about it. His approval wasn't needed back then, but the king's was. The father, who didn't like the English relatives anyway, was already, without realizing it, under the influence of Habsburg. Namely, through 2 long-time advisors whom he trusted blindly. They both represent the interests of the Habsburg court and Emperor Charles VI. In Austria, they want to prevent Prussia from forming a long-term alliance with England through such marriages at any cost. Therefore, they suggested to the king the young Princess Elisabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel-Bevern instead. She was a niece of the emperor, modest, God-fearing, and also quite pretty. Friedrich receives a letter from his father in 1732, in which it states, among other things, "My dear son Fritz, you know that when my children are obedient, I love them very much. I have thought of nothing but establishing you, both in the army and with a proper daughter-in-law. I have had the princesses of the land examined as much as possible, and found the Princess of Bevern. You must now quickly write me your sentiment." The question about his feelings is merely a formal courtesy. The father has hinted that he will only be reinstated as Crown Prince if he agrees to an engagement with Elisabeth Christine. And so he writes back. He submits to his father's will in everything. They marry in 1733. There wasn't much opportunity to get to know each other, as Friedrich had to complete his military training over the next 3 years. Meanwhile, Elisabeth Christine, who appears quite pretty in all known paintings, was to be taught a bit of worldly demeanour at the Prussian residence. This was to be ensured by none other than the mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Wilhelmine. Their combined resentment over the English double wedding not happening was now felt by the young crown princess from the provinces. In the next 2 years, Friedrich, who submitted to his father in everything to regain his freedom, was appointed head of an infantry regiment in Neuruppin and promoted to guard major.
After Friedrich, as Crown Prince, is now rehabilitated and has also consented to the forced marriage, notably the father gifts him the small castle Rheinsberg, located north of Ruppin, which he acquired for 300,000 thalers. In the circle of friends at Rheinsberg, he spends, as he later writes, the happiest time of his life. Here he can, for the first time, indulge his inclinations towards music, art, especially ancient and French literature, which had met with complete incomprehension from his father. Friedrich gives the building a lightness. The interior is decorated in pastel colors, matte blue, flesh-colored pink, lime green, corresponding to the sensitive spirit of the Rococo fashion, which is currently in vogue. The ceilings are adorned with cherubs and other delicate allegorical figures. The ceiling painting in the tower cabinet is by Antoine Pen Minerva as the protector of art and science. In the round tower cabinet where he retreats to work, Friedrich finally finds time and leisure for an in-depth self-study. Here he immerses himself in the world of his books. His day begins at 6 a.m. and rarely ends before midnight. He already referred to himself back in 1728 as Frederick the Philosopher. The French term philosophe meant enlightener at that time, and like them, he feels like a philosopher, as he wants to think critically and without prejudice about himself and his life, about politics and the welfare of society, about religion and the state, and act accordingly. Philosophy served him as a reflection on the possibility of practical action.
Here, he devotes himself with enthusiasm to music and composes countless flute sonatas and even his first symphony in 1738. Here, he also puts his anti-Machiavel on paper, a catalogue of virtues for the enlightened ideal monarch. The primary obligation of a ruler, it says there, is to be the first servant of his state and to make his people happy. Yet it also justifies a preemptive strike if necessary, as well as a war of interest in a given case. In such a case, the prince pursues the interests of his people, which not only entitles him, but even obliges him to resort to violence if necessary. Shortly before his move to Rheinsberg, he had initiated correspondence with the French writer Voltaire. This also encourages him to publish the Anti-Machiavel, of course anonymously and in Holland. During the Rheinsberg years, Friedrich maintains a polite and courteous relationship with his wife. As he confides to a close friend, he indeed fulfills his marital duties. Nevertheless, offspring does not appear during the 4 years in Rheinsberg. End of May 1740. A scene as described by a guest, a Baron Bielefeld, in a letter to a friend. The Crown Prince often holds a salon concert and plays the flute himself. He handles the instrument with utmost perfection. His finger dexterity as well as his performance are unique. He has composed several sonatas himself. I was particularly enchanted by his Adagio. Yet he also dances beautifully, is the embodiment of lightness and grace, and a friend of every decent pleasure.
Royal Highness the Crown Prince will be beside himself over this disturbance.
Don't talk so much. This is of utmost importance. Don't hold me up.
But then suddenly a messenger appears and whispers something into the Crown Prince's ear, and the celebration is over.
The dance is done.
Word spreads quickly. The King of Prussia is apparently dying. Frederick rides to Potsdam. He has received these messages multiple times already, but this time it seems truly serious concerning the father. For weeks now, the king, plagued for years by gout and dropsy, is experiencing a final health crisis. In recent years, he seems to have regained his trust in the Crown Prince. Indeed, numerous contemporaries confirm that the hours between father and son are marked by harmony.
Have you come after all, my son? Now I lay my land in your hands, young king.
He loudly proclaims before witnesses, "My God, I die content, as I leave behind such a worthy son and successor." After all that has happened between these two, this is not exactly a given, as throughout his life the father has taken care of everything here as well. The coffin has been standing next to the bed for days, and the entire burial ceremony is arranged down to the last detail. The servants are not to receive mourning clothes, as that costs too much, but merely a mourning band around the hat.
Generals, this is your king.
Even the last words of the ever-pious king are noted. He bids farewell with the words, "Lord Jesus, in you I live, in you I die." In the film it says, instead,
Make Prussia great.
Accordingly determined to do exactly this in the spirit of Nazi propaganda, Werner Hinz must now look prophetically into the distance. The message that should reach the audience was clear to everyone as early as 1935. It read, "Make Germany great." Just like his father, Frederick rejects a lavish coronation at the start of his reign, as well as wearing a crown. After his death, Frederick William leaves behind an army of 80,000 men, a well-filled state treasury, and an exemplary administration. All of Europe now looks to Berlin with hope and the affable, educated young king who is openly committed to the goals of the Enlightenment. The young philosopher on the throne immediately sets about appointing the outstanding minds of his time to the Berlin Academy of Sciences. First, he brings back the philosopher and polymath Christian Wolff, who was banished to Halle by his father, and who will later have a significant influence on Prussian legislation. Then follows his call the renowned mathematician and physicist Leonhard Euler, who co-founds the Academy of Sciences, as well as the naturalist and astronomer Moreau de Maupertuis, who was recommended to him by Voltaire. However, as announced before the forced marriage, he sends away his own wife, at least from his immediate surroundings. He gifts her the small Schönhausen Palace, where Elisabeth Christine will live in virtual exile until the end of her life. Everyone else should find happiness in their own way, as it is stated in one of his first edicts of tolerance after he had previously abolished press censorship and torture. With astonishment the inhabitants read, "All religions are equally good, as long as the people who profess them are honest people." And if Turks and heathens came and wanted to populate the land, we would build them mosques and churches.
At the end of October, Frederick unexpectedly receives the news of the sudden death of Emperor Charles VI. He realizes that this changes the political situation, as the Habsburg succession now appears suddenly unsecured. For many years, the emperor, who had no male heirs, had tried, through a Habsburg house law, the so-called pragmatic sanction, to introduce female succession for his throne, which his daughter, the 23-year-old Maria Theresa, is now supposed to assume. The German sovereigns had mostly agreed at the time, including Frederick's father, and most of them received territorial promises for it. Only the Duchy of Jülichburg, promised to Prussia, had unfortunately not been handed over by the Habsburgs. So, as the newly crowned King of Prussia sees it, there is still an outstanding account with Austria. Without a declaration of war, 27,000 soldiers of the Prussian army therefore march across the Oder into neighboring Silesia at Krossen on December 16th.
With the death of Emperor Charles VI, all European powers were faced with the question of how they would position themselves on the issue of the Austrian succession. There were various possibilities. Frederick decided in this situation to conquer Silesian duchies through military measures. This decision must be seen in connection with considerations that were probably also made by the Elector of Saxony, who was simultaneously King of Poland in the same direction. It was simply about who was quicker to seize Silesia. Ultimately, it was Prussia.
He writes to his minister Podewils, "I have crossed the Rubicon with flying banners and ringing music. My troops are of the best will. Everything will go according to our wishes, and I have reason to expect all conceivable good from this undertaking."
Here, actions are taken according to reason of state. There, the motive of glory plays a role. A prince should acquire glory, preferably on the battlefield. In the Prussian case, the motive of revenge also plays a role. Historical arguments are invoked. A hereditary brotherhood, which was concluded in 1537 on somewhat shaky ground with Silesian princely families, is brought up again. But all these are just layers that are placed around actions according to state reason and are intended to make the actions plausible to contemporaries. Without a doubt, Frederick attacks the young Archduchess of Austria, but it must be considered that if Prussia had not done it, other potentates would have acted in the same way. The Elector of Saxony, who at that time was simultaneously the King of Poland, had indeed already issued a corresponding mobilization order to his army. But the Prussians were quicker. The Battle of Mollwitz, which had been the test to see whether Prussia could actually enforce its act of aggression, went extremely unfavorably for the young king, the young commander. The Prussian cavalry is initially completely driven from the field by the attack of the Austrian artillery. In this situation, Field Marshal von Schwerin decides to recommend to his king to bring further reinforcements from a nearby place. In short, the older soldier sends the young king away from the battlefield to then use the opportunity to drive the Austrians from the field with the superior Prussian infantry, which was feared above all for its rapid-fire tactics. The maps depict the linear tactics typical of the 18th century, where enemy armies moved towards each other geometrically, as if on a drawing board. One can assume that in reality it didn't happen exactly like this, but the side that could move in such a way that it was almost linear likely gained the upper hand. The inability of later filmmakers, whether from the 1930s or from our days, to recreate such scenes actually only shows how difficult it was to move soldiers in certain formations linearly and tactically. The Prussians had an advantage here as well.
1 hour after the king's disappearance, the Battle of Mollwitz is decided. Schwerin sends him a courier with the message of victory, which reaches him after 80 kilometers. Friedrich never overcame the shame of his flight throughout his life. And from then on, he swears to himself that he will never again leave his soldiers during a battle. In January 1741, Friedrich enters the capital of Silesia, Breslau, without a fight. Although the Catholic high nobility holds back, most citizens are of Lutheran faith and cheer him on, and the councillors also pay homage to the new ruler. Friedrich's assumption that Maria Theresa would give in so quickly, however, very quickly proves to be a fatal misconception. She may be young in years, but she is a very determined character. After the unexpectedly lost Battle of Mollwitz, a lot of claimants suddenly appear in her antechamber. The background is that Franz of Lorraine, Maria Theresa's husband, wants to become emperor, which displeases most, especially since the Wittelsbach cousin Karl VII is now also asserting claims to the imperial crown himself. The only bright spot appears to her on the occasion of her coronation as Queen of Hungary, with the promise of the Hungarian estates to support her with 20,000 soldiers. From now on, her foreign policy is aimed at defeating the Prussians in the field and regaining possession of the annexed territories. She now decides to double the strength of her army and raises additional taxes for the government and the military. Although Bavaria and France also invade the western territories of Austria, Friedrich remains the main enemy. Maria Theresa senses that Friedrich is not only interested in Silesia.
With the expansion of the War of the Austrian Succession, not only Prussia against Austria, but now also Bavaria, Saxony, France, the theatre of war has shifted to Bohemia. Friedrich was able to march into Bohemia with his army in the spring of 1742. The opponent, Prince Charles of Lorraine, however, pursues him with his army, is therefore quite active in action, and attacks Frederick very unexpectedly in the area of Kuttenberg and Czaslau near the village of Chottositz. The observation that the Austrians had to get used to the fact that the Prussians were superior to them in the field is well documented by this. The Austrians were indeed capable of launching attacks, even if they mostly failed against the superior Prussian infantry. For Frederick, the Battle of Chottositz holds great significance because, unlike Mollwitz, it is now the first confrontation on a battlefield that he himself decisively influences and leads to victory for the Prussian forces.
After the lost Battle of Chottositz, Maria Theresa decides, in order not to splinter her forces, to make peace with the Prussian king. The negotiations come about through the mediation of the British envoy Lord Hindford, whom Frederick jokingly calls Lord Hunsford. The specially minted commemorative coin speaks of a solid peace, but it will only last 2 years. Right at the beginning of his reign, Frederick intends to set new urban planning accents in Berlin. He can start right in the center itself. The former Lustgarten presents a completely overgrown appearance. Wooden floors, manure carts, barrels, not a very inviting entrance for a residence. On the other side of the Hundebrücke in front of the armory, it doesn't look much better. Frederick envisions a forum here, a kind of public assembly place modelled after ancient examples. His friend Knobelsdorff begins construction of the Linden Opera in the summer of 1741 and decides on a gable front modelled after Palladio's Villa Rotonda. The entire construction period lasts 15 months. The completed opera house, at the time the first freestanding one in Germany, stands in an as yet unstructured urban space on a sandy area, which Knobelsdorff says serves primarily one purpose, that 1,000 carriages can leisurely stop there. Tailored for this, Antoine Pen creates a painting Apollo and the Muses. Centrally, the god figure Apollo floats above Parnassus, behind him the war goddess Bellona, who represents the First Silesian War. To the right, the two muses of theatre. Below, tambourine, zither and lute as theatre props. On the left side of the picture, Clio, the muse of history. Still present today, though restored multiple times, is the famous Apollo Hall, which was meant to set a festive mood for visitors then and now. Court composer Graun hires singers in Italy, actor Nanhu searches for actors in Paris. Dancers are hired or, if necessary, forced to Berlin under escort. This happened in 1744 with the dancer Barberina, who was then compensated with an annual salary of 12,000 thalers. Although Frederick is absent for months at a time over the next 2 decades, he still keeps an eye on the continued construction of the Forum Fridericianum, as it is now called. In the mid-18th century, it becomes the central place in Berlin, where people meet, forming a kind of hinge between the residence and the street Unter den Linden, which leads out to Charlottenburg. Following are the Prince Heinrich Palace at the site of today's university, as well as the Royal Library and the start of construction of the Hedwig Church. If the Forum Fridericianum were occasionally closed to car traffic today, one would immediately have a meeting place again, where, as back then, the most wonderful and delightful entertainments could be offered.
However, the entertainments are over for now, as another war is looming. Once again, it's about Silesia, which Maria Theresa is determined to reclaim. The Peace of Breslau, that was yesterday. While Frederick built an opera in Berlin and did other useful things, the Austrian queen had to defend her throne and the claim to the imperial dignity which she had intended for her husband Francis of Lorraine. But meanwhile, the Bavarian elector Charles VII has had himself crowned emperor by her opponents. But he has no army, no means, and is an emperor without land. Austria promptly marches into Bavaria and places it under its administration. Frederick must now rightly fear that they will reclaim Silesia.
These are beautiful images which a trumpet choir of the squadron Garde des Corps, in a uniform, by the way, that was only worn after 1762, show us here. The best thing about this scene, in my opinion, is the king's saddle gear and perhaps also the strangely shaped standard of the Garde des Corps. The king certainly did not set out from any castle behind a kettle drummer and trumpet-blowing Garde des Corps into the Second Silesian War. This is how such things are staged for film and the audience. But reality usually looks very prosaic with some kind of carriage. One can always safely assume that the way films show it to us, it certainly wasn't like that.
Friedrich has the advantage of personally leading his battles against the Austrians as a commander. He can directly decide on supply and logistics issues himself. His rival Maria Theresa cannot do this, as she relies on her generals, who often have to make decisions based on their own judgment. News from the front reaches her in Vienna only after several days of delay.
The depiction of combat in the 18th century is, from today's perspective, significantly accompanied by colorful uniforms, waving plumes, and other beautiful things. Whether the martial events, which in the film scenes mostly turn into wild confrontations, man against man, hacking, stabbing, strangling, murdering, actually were like that, remains to be seen. In the vast majority of cases, the soldiers, who were also professionals in their field, never let it come to a direct confrontation. One already relies on the firepower of the infantry rifles, then also the artillery. How the cavalry battles played out would need to be investigated separately.
An even remotely authentic impression of what happened back then, of the countless sieges and battles, is today, over 200 years later, almost impossible.
As we see the images, they could well relate to the events around the Battle of Soor. Here too, Prince Charles of Lorraine once again managed to maneuver Frederick into a situation where he could attack him from a favorable position. It also played a role that they attacked a hill, accomplishing a feat that was considered absolutely impossible by contemporaries.
In November 1745, the King of Prussia finally sends Maria Theresa an offer. Her husband Franz Stephan could become Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation if Maria Theresa renounces Silesia in return. Franz Stephan would indeed receive the imperial crown, but his wife would be the secret empress. Maria Theresa gives in, at least for the time being. All this is sealed by the Peace Treaty of Dresden, which was long negotiated. On Christmas Day 1745, the negotiations in Dresden are finally concluded, and the Peace Treaty is signed. In the sense of the preliminary Peace of Breslau of 1742, it confirmed Prussia's sovereign possession of Silesia. The treaty speaks of a solid agreement, in which Silesia is now definitively assigned to Prussia. There is peace in the land for 11 years, but then it will start all over again. In 1744, Friedrich decides to plant a vineyard on the barren hill near Potsdam. He wants to build a small pleasure palace in the Rococo style for the summer months. As a replacement for the happy Rheinsberg, which is too far from the two resident cities Berlin and Potsdam. The original basic sketch for the new little palace he designs with his own hand and once again commissions his friend, the architect Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff, with the execution. He then has a natural hillside transformed into 6 large terraces. There is a dispute over the execution of the single-story palace. Knobelsdorff wants to place the palace on a solid substructure, which would have given it an elevated appearance from afar. But Friedrich prevails. The new house is built at ground level, flat on the top terrace. A fundamental flaw, as it later turns out, because from the lower garden fountain, it can only be seen halfway. At the garden front now stands the name Sanssouci, without worry. What Friedrich thought about the comma he had placed between the two words is hard to guess. In 1747, Friedrich succeeds, after long negotiations, in acquiring the bronze of the so-called praying boy, which was cast in classical antiquity on Rhodes, for a considerable 5,000 thalers, and he has it set up across from his library. The charming view of the Havel landscape reminds Friedrich of the landscape around Rheinsberg with its forests and lakes. Influencing his choice of location are the seclusion and silence. In the park, the marble sculptures by French artists, which Frederick had placed there in the 1740s, still stand today, including depictions of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air.
Essentially, Friedrich's summer residence, with its few rooms and the round marble hall, is little more than a spacious country estate situated on a vineyard. With more than 8 overnight guests, it already becomes cramped. Germany, indeed all of Europe, looks fascinated towards Sanssouci. The Rococo Palace at the gates of Potsdam seems to become the El Dorado of progress and enlightenment. In the marble hall of the new pleasure house, those round tables now regularly take place, where the intellectual participants are supposed to feel as equals among equals in spirited discourse. Naturally, they chat in French. Even Voltaire has become curious now after Friedrich invited him several times to his round tables. His quick wit and his penchant for mockery are contagious, and he does more to attract intelligent minds to Potsdam. Voltaire becomes Friedrich's advisor in literary, especially stylistic matters. Voltaire comments on the literary ambitions of his royal friend with mockery and goodwill. He is, however, extremely taken with the enlightened legal reforms that Frederick and his Chancellor Koczegi are implementing in Prussia. After 3 years, however, he has to realize that Frederick is becoming increasingly scarce and is using official duties as a pretext. His days in Potsdam are numbered.
He continues to be active in literature, writes poems, he makes music. He corresponds with philosophers in Europe, and people flock to be near him. People come to his court even for a small fee, making it easy for the king to unite interesting conversation partners at his table and engage in discussions with them, not only about philosophical writings and philosophical topics in the narrow sense, but also about technology, about economics, about the role of genders, the role of religion. All topics are discussed very openly, but all topics are also discussed with the awareness that they are certainly not subjects for the public. And the writings that emerge from the round table and are published by the members often have to appear anonymously, because Prussian censorship would ban them. And the king also lets writings appear that are not published under his name, and we only learned much later that they originated from him. So it is a clandestine literature that is widely disseminated, received, and which indeed creates a myth around Sanssouci, around the Rheinsberg, around this monarch very early on.
One of the legends of Sanssouci, the flute concert by Adolf von Menzel. Women, as we have learned, are not allowed in Friedrich's refuge. So we have to imagine the scene in the Potsdam city palace. But come spring 1756, peace is once again over. Messages from secret couriers reach Friedrich, stating that secret agreements have been made between Vienna, Versailles, and Petersburg. Maria Theresa wants to reclaim Silesia at all costs. She therefore allies with Madame Pompadour, the mistress of the French king, and the Russian Empress Elisabeth against Friedrich. The king suddenly feels surrounded by enemies. An alliance between Austria, France, Saxony, and Russia seals the pact against Prussia. First it hits the Saxons. Again, an attack without a declaration of war. It is the beginning of a 7-year war.
Gentlemen, the Austrians have appointed generals, and their army has been ordered to march. I have asked through my envoy in Vienna to the Empress and Queen whether she has entered into an alliance against me with France and Russia. The Empress answered no. The alliance still exists and was concluded at Versailles. That means war. I will attack an enemy 5 times stronger against all rules of warfare. I must do it or all is lost. If we stand with folded arms, we will be crushed. So there is not a moment to lose. The glory of the Prussian arms and the well-being of my people command me to act and will guide me until my death.
The question of which political actions actually triggered the 7 Years' War has been very controversially assessed by research since the 19th century and actually up to today. As the film presents things to us, it is about Prussia's struggle for existence against an overpowering coalition of enemies. But it has also been pointed out that Frederick certainly pursued conquest intentions with the renewed outbreak of the war under certain circumstances. I believe that these things fall short, but one must see that the 7 Years' War, insofar as it was fought over the possession of Silesia, was only part of a global conflict that was just as much fought between England and France over possessions in North America, but also in the Caribbean and all the way to India. Here, various conflict potentials have intertwined. Ultimately, Frederick sought and obtained an ally with his decision to ally with England, with whom he was able to withstand the immense pressure of the superior force for so many years.
The legend formation around this Prussian monarch began during his lifetime. And it is not surprising that he was granted the honorary title the Great during the 7 Years' War. Afterwards, but also already during the war, by the public, and indeed throughout Europe. He is admired because he held out militarily, but also psychologically, in a hopeless situation. Because the wars of that time took a heavy toll on a monarch who fought at the head of his troops. That was completely unusual, and for that reason alone, he was seen as an exceptional figure.
I will, against all the rules of the art of war, attack the enemy 3 times stronger wherever I find him. I must take this step or all is lost. We must defeat the enemy, or let ourselves be buried by his batteries. So I think, and so I will act.
Frederick himself knows that the decision brought about on the battlefield depends on very, very many factors that a commander can only determine to a certain extent. His task was to reduce these factors as much as possible, but unforeseen events always occur. I think his judgment can be trusted quite well.
With the so-called Frederikus Rex films, the National Socialists broadly used the splendor of Prussian history for propaganda purposes to historically legitimize their claim to power. The war propaganda machinery set in motion by Joseph Goebbels in 1939 invokes the steadfastness and perseverance of Frederick. Using the glorious era of Prussian history between 1756 and 1763, the German population is to be confronted with duty fulfillment, unconditional leadership, and loyalty unto death.
To us who are not military scientists, these images today only demonstrate what the Germans have learned at least since the end of the Second World War, which they lost. That wars are instigated by a few, driven by their own personal motives. Back then, it was about fame, honor, and territorial gain, whereas today it is about resources, geostrategic, territorial, and power political interests, and profitable arms exports.
Leuthen plays an outstanding role in the Prussian military tradition because, at the end of a rather unsuccessful campaign in 1757, the king managed to attack and decisively defeat a superior Austrian force in the area of Breslau, precisely at Leuthen. The effects were probably more mental than real. Frederick had to continue waging war for many years after that, but due to this again sensational, spectacular element, the Battle of Leuthen has moved to the forefront of Prussian military tradition. In the darkness, a grenadier, a musketeer in this army, begins a hymn. The surrounding soldiers join in. In the end, the entire army sings this evangelical Protestant hymn, "Now thank we all our God." The fact is documented, there's no need to speculate about it. It is of great importance to us because it gives an idea of the anchoring of religious conduct in the common man. The Prussian army, which was already established by Frederick William I, was firmly anchored with a military church system. And I believe that from these motives, the simple soldiers also received the strength to endure the immense hardships for body and soul. Just as Leuthen represented a spectacular victory of the Prussian arms, the Battle of Kunersdorf has gone down in military history as one of the most devastating defeats of Frederick the Great. The Prussian army is defeated by the united Russian and Austrian forces near Frankfurt Oder. Kunersdorf was also a visible sign that the Prussian army had probably lost its previously unchallenged superiority over the opponent in the confrontation with the Russian army. The film, whose scenes are shown here, can perhaps be distinguished from its predecessors in that the cruel reality of war is depicted here for both the military and the civilian population with a starkness that the previous films did not demonstrate. The audience was likely meant to be reminded that such hardships, such sufferings, are to be bravely endured in order to reach a victorious end, just like Frederick the Great. That this was naturally meant to suggest a reference to the reality of World War II, but never could, is another matter. I mean, burning villages, slain civilians, all the terrible sacrifices that acts of war bring with them are practically presented here in costume, and with that they were perhaps also meant to generate acceptance for it. That ultimately, after a few years of World War II, all these sufferings and horrific events would also move back to the German audience was certainly not foreseen by Mr. Harlan.
During the 12 years of the Nazi dictatorship, we can see that from the crisis situation of 1942 and 1943 onwards, it is no longer Prussian ideals in general, but rather Frederick the Great as a figure that moves to the center of propaganda. This is most evident in public speeches and in posters that one-sidedly revive and invoke this monarch and his history to support the monarch in military exceptional situations. The message is, therefore, to persevere with Frederick. We must act and think like Frederick as a people again. We must show ourselves worthy of this great monarch by not becoming faint-hearted. Difficulties and even limited defeats must give us new hope and strength.
The situation of the king should be well represented by this scene. What he then has to discuss with his General von Schenkendorf is, of course, again hair-raising nonsense. But we can take this as a means of realizing that the Prussian army has encountered a military power in the Russian adversary that it could hardly defeat with its resources.
Did he see that, Schenkendorf? The Prussians have fled.
The Bernburg Regiment, Your Majesty.
But they are Prussians. Bernburg Regiment. Or not. Schenkendorf? I saw back wounds. Back wounds. In Prussia, that did not happen. Until this very day.
The surgeon will be able to show him the entry and exit hole of the gunshot wound, but here it's less about a forensic matter and more about Friedrich, played by Otto Gebühr, wanting to signal that it would have been outrageous for Prussian troops to flee the field. Well, one could name some scenes in the preceding battles where he could also see his back wounds. But that's not the point. Rather, the point is that Kunersdorf was also a signal that Prussian superiority was slowly beginning to exhaust itself. The Battle of Torgau, the last major battlefield confrontation of the 7 Years' War, is not depicted here in its actual layout through the film scenes. For the first time, Frederick attempts not to carry out the proven flank attack, but to simultaneously attack the Austrian opponent at the front and rear with two separately operating army corps. It was an extremely bold concept that, with the communication means of his time, almost went wrong, but ultimately led to success. The victory at Torgau cost Prussia, percentage-wise, no fewer losses than the terrible defeat at Kunersdorf. But just as at Kunersdorf the Russians were decisively weakened, one could probably also say that the Austrian army was no longer capable of larger battlefield-based actions after this terrible battle. In the end, it was, so to speak, the one who held out a bit harder who won the race, and that was once again Frederick the Great.
At the end of 761, Frederick is nevertheless on the verge of collapse. The collapse of Prussia in the next year seems inevitable. Frederick can only muster 100,000 men. The Allies have armies 3 times as strong in the east alone. His troops in the west could hardly withstand a new wave of attacks either. In this situation, Great Britain, the only powerful ally of Prussia, is now also withdrawing from the war. Frederick seems to be in a hopeless situation. But now a miracle happens, the so-called miracle of the House of Brandenburg. Prussia owes its salvation to the fact that in December, the Russian Empress Elisabeth Petrovna dies. Russia immediately withdraws from the war in January 1762, and Maria Theresa loses one of her most important allies. Elizabeth's successor, Peter III, who grew up in Germany and has always been an admirer of Frederick, makes peace on May 5, 1762, and shortly thereafter signs an alliance treaty with Prussia. Shortly thereafter, Sweden also makes peace. After the last Prussian victories in July and October 1762, the empire also exits the war. In November, Great Britain and France cease hostilities, and on February 15, 1763, Austria finally ends the war with Prussia in the Peace of Hubertusburg. And yet the Berliners cheer as the troops march back in. Who asks about the meaning of wars afterward? The main thing is that it's over. But for the celebrating people, the one they remember does not return. The radiant king of yore is no more. And so the Berliners wait in vain on these days. The king is not in the mood for celebrations. He wants to be alone, first withdrawing to Potsdam to listen to a Te Deum in the garrison church, played for him by Graun. Seven years of wars against Maria Theresa. Several times total defeat. Hundreds of thousands of dead on both sides. The result: a devastated country, an impoverished people, and a demoralized army. And all triggered by his invasion of Silesia 15 years earlier. Was it all worth it? When Veit Harlan recreated the historically documented scene in 1941 for The Great King, he shows a mourning, crying ruler. Through the censorship of the propaganda ministry, he only got this because it was followed by an unbearably kitschy ending with waving barley fields, happy people, and turning windmills. All it needed was the final victory, which, however, did not materialize. In Prussia, however, peace truly returns for the time being, concluded in 1763 between all the warring states. This will, at least as far as Austria is concerned, last for a whole century, until the Battle of Königgrätz. The devastated land will be rebuilt in the next 23 years that Frederick still has left. He will contribute his part and personally take care of everything and everyone, just like his father once did. 1763, the ink under the Treaty of Hubertusburg is barely dry when Frederick gets the urge again. The new palace is built, with which he wants to demonstrate Prussia's supremacy, not least architecturally. A massive block defiantly placed in the marsh and sand of the Mark. At the western end of the main axis of Sanssouci, he wants to erect a real castle to spite all the envious. Frederick the Great himself cannot muster much sympathy for the pompous complex. He bluntly states what no one else would dare to say publicly. A boast, an empty pocket brag, is what the new palace is. A picture from 1775. On the main avenue leading from Sanssouci Palace to the new palace, Frederick has mulberry trees planted through which he rides on his white horse. His new hobby, the targeted breeding of silkworms, which are very fond of mulberry trees. He has dozens of mulberry plantations and silkworm breeding facilities built. Thousands of mulberry trees are planted to serve as food for the silkworms. Frederick considers the production of the noble fabric from his own manufacture as a measure of Prussia's economic development and subsidizes it for years. Specialized weavers are settled and generously supported. He has always been convinced that economic autonomy must be the backbone of every state. As for the various manufactories, he wrote upon taking office, thus they are the most useful and profitable, for through them one meets the needs of the inhabitants, and even forces the neighbors to pay tribute to the industriousness that has been displayed. The manufactories, whose founding he now promotes with state funds, are small factories whose machines and tools are mechanically driven only by muscle and water power. In Silesia, 7,000 houses have been destroyed by the war. 8,000 will be newly built within 3 years. Now he does exactly what his father would have done. He brings thousands of people into the country as settlers and establishes over 900 new villages. Also, his training in the Chamber of Agriculture and Domains 30 years ago now apparently benefits him. He forces the initially skeptical farmers to cultivate potatoes as a staple food and tirelessly fights for the cultivation of clover, lupines, and fodder beets. Frederick dedicates the next 2 decades, which he still has in full health, to the reconstruction of the country. To the astonishment of his European neighbors, he not only distributes his military horses to the farmers, but also magazine stocks to the starving population.
Write that down for me. The state stores in the Mark deliver to Pomerania without charge. 80,000 bushels of grain, 40,000 bushels of flour, 20,000 bushels of seed grain. My silverware at Cleve Castle will be melted down, coined into money, and transferred to the province of Pomerania. Hey, come here! How are things here with you?
Bad, Majesty. The war.
I know already. No livestock anymore?
No, Majesty. What the war leaves behind, the plague takes from us.
All our cows have died.
You surely haven't used rock salt again?
Yes, indeed. Yes, Majesty.
Yes, but did you crush the rock salt? You must hang it so that the livestock can lick it. Do you understand? Are those his trees?
Yes, Your Majesty.
You can tell miserable.
Your Majesty, but it's very nice fruit.
Is that so? Give it here. Quite good. I see you keep your head up. I thank you for the fruit.
Along the Oder, he has several 100,000 acres of moorland reclaimed, likewise in Rheinluck. and he begins with land consolidation, that is, the merging of the scattered farm plots. Again and again, he rides through the land to personally assure himself of the progress of things. By now, according to legend, he becomes the benevolent father of the country, old Fritz, to whom people can even personally present their concerns.
Even in his last years, Friedrich has a 12-hour workday and handles countless matters. He also holds the annual parades, which last for hours even in pouring rain. The end of his military career, the farewell to his generals, is one of those numerous 19th century historical paintings that were meant to stylize the myth of the upright old soldier.
Until the late 70s, the famous flute concerts still resound in Potsdam. But Friedrich himself participates less and less as he has lost his front teeth and can no longer play the beloved transverse flute. To his maternal friend Countess Dumas, he wrote years ago, "You will see me again as an old man and almost as an old chatterbox. I am grey like a donkey, lose a tooth every day, and am half paralyzed by gout." In his last years, the king becomes increasingly lonely. Often plagued by gout attacks, he rarely leaves Sanssouci anymore. In the summer of 1786, the gout attacks become more severe. Yet even in the week before his death, Friedrich dictates one last cabinet order. On the evening of August 17th, Friedrich complains of chills and has himself covered. His last discernible words, "It will get better soon. The mountain is overcome." The next day, the king's body is transferred to the Potsdam City Palace. The solemn funeral takes place in the Potsdam Garrison Church. Right next to his father, he is laid to rest here for the time being. His successor does not want to comply with his wish to be buried without any fuss in the designated crypt in the park of Sanssouci. The crypt is said to be too damp and generally unsuitable. Friedrich eventually got his last wish, albeit over 200 years later, after his Prussia and the rest of Germany had been repeatedly reduced and enlarged, destroyed, then divided, and finally reunited through various wars. However, it did displease him that Silesia, for whose possession he waged war for 10 years, no longer belongs to Prussia. But that no longer exists either.